Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nick Fortuna, who will moderate the Rants session that includes Robert Yang, Jodi Asbell-Clarke, Edith Harrell Caperton, Scott Kirk, and Gaming Guild Grandmaster James Bauer.
Hi, everyone. So this is a rant session. Basically, what the format of this is going to be is that individuals are going to be offering you arguments regarding different topics around games and serious games and issues around serious games. We're going to have a few short rants by each of the presenters here, and then we're going to follow that up with a discussion, sort of addressing some of the issues that were presented. So I'm not going to waste any time, as I have already wasted a lot of time. Instead, I'll just hand it over to Robert to begin. So this is Robert Yang, and he'll be talking about LGBT issues in regards to games.
My mic thing fell out. Hi, I'm Robert Yang. I'm an indie game developer as well as a practicing homosexual. Stop, I'm blushing now. I actually haven't been practicing recently, but that's a different rant. Different rant for a different conference. I've been making first-person shooters for a while, so games like Doom or Quake or Portal. And, but only recently have I started making games about like gay people, where I've kind of been interested in my own identity and exploring that through the medium of games. I made a first-person shooter called Radiator. It's a game about gay divorce, because I feel like gay marriage is already falling out of fashion, so 2011. So gay divorce, you know, that's on the up and up. And you don't actually shoot anything in this game. You just kind of sit in a marriage therapist office in Fresno, California, and stare at your husband as he complains about how inconsiderate you are. That's the whole game. More recently, I made a first-person sex education game called Condom Core. In it, you stare into the windows of the building across the street, and this building just happens to be full of mostly naked men. And you have to zoom in on their underwear, on their bulging crotches, and you shoot the right size of condom at their crotch to protect it. It's kind of about, you know, having fun with the male gaze for once. It's kind of about extrapolating, you know, those big, burly first-person shooters to their logical conclusions. So I made these games about queer people because the game industry wasn't doing it, I felt like, for whatever reason. And I felt like no one else really saw this big, like, game design hole, this, like, vast void. I kind of just, like, felt alone in this. But fortunately, I was wrong. I wasn't alone. Anna Anthropy is a really great designer. She makes these fantastic retro arcade games about lesbian spider bondage queens from Mars, and just these really heartfelt, really like handmade feeling games about living as a transgender person. Christine Love also makes these brilliant visual novels that talk about sexuality, privacy, and technology. And from what I hear, her recent release, Analog, A Hate Story, is actually doing all right on Steam. And Steam is kind of like an iTunes for games. And I think that's kind of crazy because this thoughtful, complex visual novel about transhumanism and the mediation of love is selling on Steam like right next to Call of Duty. And not that there's anything wrong with Call of Duty, but that's just really, I find that's really stunning. That makes me really happy. But to be fair, even the game industry is kind of joining in on the fun now. The company BioWare has just been a really great vanguard in this respect. Their most recent big-budget sci-fi RPG extravaganza, Mass Effect 3, in that game, a male player character can romance and dry hump one of two different men. That's progress. That's real choice. That's amazing. So I think altogether we are getting better at this. And I think there have been mainly two ways we've been getting better in this to make games more relevant to LGBTQ people. I think me and Anthropy usually treat identity as this like subject, as the pervasive context of the game, as we embody identity directly in the world. Take some random game about zooming in and staring at crotch bulges. Saying that game is gay is like saying water is wet. It's the most redundant thing you can say. Instead, these games, I think, are more interested in how we express and like perform our gayness and how we live as lesbians, not whether you're closeted and with a typical, coming out narrative that's popular in these gay pieces of media. And I mean, that's really important too, but I think we do need other types of narrative and broader forms of discourse. I think there's another approach too, and that involves treating identity as kind of this object, as something kind of distinct from you in the world. There's an MIT Gambit research project that does this. It's a game called A Closed World. It uses a loose Japanese RPG frame to defamiliarize identity, to try to get the player to question how exactly we form gender and sexual identity. Because, identity can be this like really funny, comfortable thing, but it can also be an unstable, fragile thing, a strength and also a vulnerability. And I think games should kind of address both sides of that. And I think both approaches can be powerful or they can be awful. I mean, a crappy game is a crappy game, and no amount of amazing transgendered people and lesbians can save it. Maybe five transgender characters can save it. Fortunately, that hasn't really been a problem. I've only been seeing more amazing games coming out. I've only been seeing more methods of discourse, more personal games, more voices adding to just this like beautiful choir where there's no harmony, but it's just awesome. And I'm just glad of that because I think a more diverse game development culture is a stronger, healthier game development culture. I'm sorry this didn't really sound more of like a rant. I'm usually not an optimist. I swear, I'm usually not an optimist at all, but I'm actually pretty optimistic about this, about where we're heading. And of course we can always do much better. Maybe like a AAA game with a transgender protagonist, or maybe in Mass Effect 4 you can sleep with like 20 dudes, I don't know. Sky's the limit. But I think we are doing a bit better, and I do want to recognize that progress. And I hope you'll join us. I hope we can all just strive together to be more excellent to each other. Thanks for listening.
So our next speakers will be Scott Kirk and Jodi, Asbell-Clarke, speaking about the challenges and difficulties in working together between developers and educators.
I'm not sure how we're going to follow dry humping, but...
That's right. I was thinking as Robert was speaking, educational games are so boring, right? I mean, and they don't have to be, but there are so many boring educational games. And that's because making educational games is really hard. We've all seen games where, they're working in a classroom and they have a lot of learning potential. The kids are quite engaged. They think it's much better than the curriculum they're doing in their class. But we know they wouldn't play them outside when they're playing on their free time. And there's also all these games that are really addictive, and people are playing them all the time, but they break the physics or the science that they're teaching or whatever they're teaching for gameplay, and it makes the educational value maybe even negative, not just zero, negative. And we know that if games are going to change education, if they're really going to have an impact, it's going to take teams. It's going to take teams of teams. We need people coming from different cultures, game design, education, research, all kinds of different worlds and perspectives coming together to solve this quest. And so in that spirit, I am Jodi Asbell-Clarke, a science educator from EdGE at Turk.
And I'm Scott Kirk. I'm the CEO of GameGurus, and we're game developers.
And we have NSF funds. EdGE and GameGurus are working together to measure science learning in games that people will play in their free choice time.
The thing that a lot of educators don't realize is we actually measure research and learning inside the game as well. We just do it for different reasons. We do it to sort of source out the problem areas within the game, when to release bonus points or virtual goods. So we use the same tools, it's just we use them for different purposes. They use them for learning, measuring learning, and we use them to make the game better.
But we can't just go to the US taxpayer and say, hey, we just spent these millions of dollars you gave us for games, and they really like them. They're really popular. They're #1 in the App Store. That doesn't swing it. We have to prove that something is coming out of here of educational value. And to do that, we need to have methods where we can do usability testing, but we have think alouds, and we correlate that to the click data. We get a large sense so that we can look at the tacit and foundational learning that's happening in games and make that explicit to researchers, to the learners, and to educators. So we need a really good sample of, say, like 500 players.
Yeah, hold on. That's another difference between educators and developers. For educators, they realize 500 people is a successful project. For game developers, it's 100,000 plus. I really think that comes down to the fact that developers realize that revenue and app sales and getting to the #1 in the App Store is the most important thing. But educators realize that the data is actually the gold.
That's right, but there's another thing. My friend Rich Halverson said at another conference, it's as if the game designers read the learning science literature and got there first. They know something. There's magic in game design. And educators need to really, really listen to that. The Portal from Valve is a perfect example. Portal and Portal 2 both have a developer commentary. If people who like Portal and are interested in learning have not looked at the developer commentary, it's magic. They don't publish in journals, but they're telling you why they built the pedagogy they did, what happened in the play testing that gives you their layered learning of game mechanic on game mechanic. I've been an educator for 20 years. I learned so much from that game.
Yeah, but Jodi says there's all sorts of scholarly research about games, but really, when it comes down to it, I've spent my entire youth playing games, killed multiple, big bosses, and I've basically wasted my entire youth learning about games hands-on. And the question is, who is more qualified to actually do this work? Someone who's played games for 20 years, made games, or someone who's read about it? And the last conference we went to, it was an NSF conference in Washington. It was clear to me that the people trying to make fun games, they really weren't fun people. So that doesn't really work. So we got to work together, because otherwise it's educators working as designers and designers pretending to be educators, and the result is just messy. So if we work together and we come together and realize each other's goals, then we can really make games that just don't suck. So thank you.
Thank you.
So our next speaker will be Adit Harel-Caperton from the Worldwide Workshop, speaking about how coding games is the new literacy.
Great. And you are definitely going to the next level after pronouncing my name correctly. That's a hard game. So I am not just the probably one before the last speaker before lunch, but also the one speaker before the pirate. And that's going to be very exciting. I can't wait to hear James talk. I really enjoyed Jane McGonigal's talk this morning, and I completely changed my talk, and I'm going to use these notes as a result. I've been a fan of her super better game ideas for a long time, and I find her optimism about gaming so inspiring. She has been talking for a couple of years now about how play is creating this blissful productivity. Don't you love that? Blissful productivity from playing games, and often stating that we are not playing enough. Go play and play more. We hear Jane says, because games can change your life. They can really make an impact on ourselves, but also good for solving the world's most urgent problems, like hunger, poverty, and health. Jane actually calculated, I still have to figure out how, that we need to accumulate 21 billion hours of gameplay per week in order to make an impact, to heal, or to overcome our problems. So I see a huge problem here. Let's call it the 21 billion hours per week challenge. First off, we need someone to create these games that we are required to play for so many hours per week. And therefore, I conclude right now that we need to cultivate talent. to help young people develop skills in designing these impactful games. Not just any games, right? Games that really help people solve the world's most urgent problems are so hard to make. Everybody in this community knows. That's why we are here. So another thing that I love about Jane's talk is this. She didn't show it today, but she showed it in her TED and South by Southwest talk. It's this oversized portrait of a kid in that moment of playing a game. And it's done by New York Times photojournalist Phil Toledano. And she's analyzing the eyebrows and the eyes and the mouth and everything. And she calls it, this is capturing the moment of epic win. Something you're not sure possible, but you're willing to try anyway. So last week, something amazing happened. Another photojournalist Matt Roth, you should Google him, published 10 portraits of gamers on his photo blog. So let me tell you about Matt's photos, because they're a little bit different. Education Week did a story about Globaloria, which is this social network for creating games that was created by my organization, the Worldwide Workshop. The story asked a lot of hard questions about how Globaloria can cultivate talent by turning classrooms into design studios, by teaching kids step by step how to conceptualize, invent, and program and code games for change in real classrooms around the nation. Matt was thrown to this one public school classroom in rural West Virginia in the middle of nowhere to capture the faces of these kids who are game makers. Not game players, game makers. Matt's photographed faces of young game makers are probably the first in history of their kind. So moving. Look at them. Matt blogged that he was deeply inspired by these young game designers' faces. And I know the feeling, because I see it every day. I'm actually in the business of creating these faces and creating learning environments that cultivate this kind of faces that Matt described in his observations: deep concentration, creative teamwork, student alone or together, faces of problem solving. He was able to capture in his amazing portraits what we have been calling hard fun. He captured these moments of pursuit of happiness of another kind. I invite Jen McGonigal to observe these portraits and think with me about the implications for her theory: playing and making, the two faces of one literacy. So here is what I'm worried about. I'm worried about that even among all these creative developers and leaders and industry leaders that are here today, and all of you that are watching us on the live stream, thank you. I worry that we are only serving a very tiny fraction of the young people that deserve these opportunities. I believe that everyone must be able to write and code and to engage in this new digital society through this new writing. So we basically need to worry about 2 points, right? The first point is equal access to this special skill set of writing and coding games. The second point is about urgency. We need to fill our future pipeline a lot faster than we do now, even in this very active community. Everyone needs to learn how to code, but we must also look beyond just coding per se. It's not just about learning how to write, right? It's also about learning how to write to inspire people to heal, to do something good, to make games to repair the world, to tell stories and simulations for what we call tikkun olam. So back to Jen McGonigal. On that point, first of all, congratulations to her joining the Games for Change board. And I take Jane very seriously. I agree with her idea that we need to play many hours of games in order to impact the world. 21 billion, I'll go with that number. But let's reflect for a moment. When Jane told us about her scary brain accident, what made her heal? What I heard today is that maybe her ability to design her game was the healing point. We know that brains lit up by complex learning. There is a lot of research about that, similar to the ones that Jane showed us about brains lighting up from playing games. Complex learning lit up brains in a wonderful, wonderful way. And making games is complex learning that lit up a lot of brains. Therefore, I conclude again that we also need to spend 21 billion hours per week on learning how to make games for change. It's the two faces of that same literacy: reading and writing, playing and making, the epic win, blended and intertwined with the epic creative coding. So here is my call to action. We must leap forward now to plan for the 10th anniversary of Games for Change and grow further beyond the festival and beyond that movement that this festival created in the last 9 years. We need to create a learning revolution. How do we grow from a movement which is usually defined as a diffused pocket of success to a revolution which is usually defined by radical, pervasive societal change? We the people, we are the difference. There are almost 1 billion gamers, we're told, worldwide, and the goal should be to create 1 billion game makers. Imagine what a great world we may have with 1 billion games. So let's each of us talk today to 5 people, to a colleague, to a family member, to a friend, to your neighbor, and to your child's teacher. Let's talk to them about what Jane says about how games can help us change ourselves and heal, and how game can help us change the world. But also talk to them about what I'm saying, that coding games, conceiving them, working very hard on them is the new writing, that everyone deserves the opportunity to learn, not just to play games, but also how to make games just like Jane. We are the revolution, and we can start now. Thank you.
This is James Bauer is next, and I feel that any further introduction I do will undermine. Allow him to perform and showcase himself.
This is about play and fun. Hello and greetings, my fellow Grand Guild Masters. It is a privilege to be able to address you today. I come before you, however, with a serious concern weighing on my countenance. A concern born of new technology, now being wed to an institution whose marriage together will likely have long-term consequences I believe we should consider. That technology, based on movable type, and recently demonstrated in Strasbourg by the serial entrepreneur, and I must say somewhat adventuresome, Johannes Gensfeldt Leyden Zem Gutenberg, is at once a wonderful invention with great potential for engagement, and on the other hand, an invention, perhaps for that reason, that will likely pattern much of what we do and how we do it for generations to come. I'm here to remind you, memento mori, remember we die, but the structures we build often persist. To put it in plain terms, my concern is not for the movable type itself, or the free printing that it allows, although I predict considerable social and political disruption may well result. Instead, I am concerned with what will likely happen as our universities, as they want to do, take this technology as their own and use it to solidify their hold on education. Remember, my friends, that 400 years ago, it was we, the Grand Masters, the Grand Guild Masters, who built the first university in Bologna as a Universitas Magnatorium et Scholarium, a community of teachers and scholars, devoted to teaching in the old ways, one-on-one, hands-on, the way that our own guilds have taught since and continue to teach. But what happens, my friends, when these universities, as they are sure to do, fall in love with printed works? Remember what the greatest teacher, Socrates, said about learning from books, as recounted by Plato and Phasaris. Books are an aid not to memory but to reminiscence, and you give your disciples not truth but only the semblance of truth. They will be hearers of many things and will have learned nothing. They will appear to be omniscient and will generally know nothing. They will be tiresome company, having the show of wisdom without the reality. My fear, my friends and colleagues, is the ability to print books, to capture and make legitimate the ruminations of academics, will create an edifice and an institution that feeds on itself, becomes more and more distant from real society and real objectives of education and learning. Learning will retreat within brick walls, more and more separate from its causes and effects, and more in the hands of academics, around which to construct their own house of cards. While the ability to cheaply publish books, for example, mean that the academic disciplines that we have struggled to keep together will inevitably divide and specialize, with books in physics and chemistry and biology and art, separate and unrelated, will the doctor of philosophy we now hold to be in such high esteem instead become broad in name only, with the actual training and focus and understanding of any one graduate far more limited? And will the ability to require our students to read our thoughts now mean that we ourselves no longer have to interact with our students? Instead, for example, standing in front of tens or even potentially hundreds of students, simply reading back our own words. What will happen to fun, to the excitement and opportunity presented by the rhetorical games of Socrates, or other games that we humans have always played to learn and change? And given the natural tendency for academics to self-aggrandize, how much of that education will revolve around questions of what, and when, and how, and worse even, who? Will we become a community of whatvilles, and whenvilles, and howvilles, and again, worse yet, whovilles? What will happen to why? A much harder issue to address in printed form and without real interaction. How do we do whyville within this new structure, I ask you? And won't all of this change and transformation result in yet another further separation between education for its own sake and the real ultimate objective of education, which is to train young people in skills valuable to our communities and to themselves in assuring a livelihood for themselves and their families? Will there be a time in the future when a student graduating from our great universities and educated at a distance through books will have no real skills, but have paid a real cost? Such a great distance from our great guilds, who built themselves and built the universities in the first place. Of course, I know and understand that our populations are beginning to grow. We must therefore use what technology we have to scale education. And of course, this new technology, the printing press, is infinitely scalable. However, we must also know in our heart of hearts that this is not ultimately the right technology for this purpose. For that reason, someone will, I predict, sometime in the future, invent a new technology. Whether that technology emerges from water or fire, or soil or sand, it will emerge. Unfortunately, I don't know when. It could be 200 years, it could be 600 years. And here is my greatest concern that I bring before you today. That when the technology emerges, the institutions of education we have built around ourselves and around the printing press will be so strong and well established that they will fight to co-opt the new technology. They will attempt to bend it to their own image, use it as a new form of book, strive to maintain control of its use, seek to maintain its position as the controlling center of learning. We can only hope, my friends, that this new technology, whatever it is, will be strong enough to force its will and return learning and education back to its roots. Let the games of Socrates and the learning games of children back in the door. In fact, break down the doors altogether and once again link learning to its true purposes in human society. So again I say, memento mori, remember we die. But the things we build, especially in times of great change, often persist and with significant and sometimes unpredictable consequences. Thank you.
Okay, the next step of this is a short conversation around some of these issues, and I think that I guess my observation is while I was very impressed by all topics that were addressed, and I was impressed by the largely optimistic or alternately depressive spirit that was brought out. As a punk rocker, despite my current dress, I'm used to Rants being angry. So I'm curious as to whether each person or group could state off of the topic that they introduced today, the thing about the current status of games and games' relationship to serious topics that makes them the angriest.
Can I go?
Yeah, well, you described yourself as a pessimist.
So I should be really just deeply pessimistic. Okay. There are virtually no games with LGBTQ protagonists. You're always forced to be straight, and that's fun sometimes. But it's not fun like other times, and it's uncomfortable, and sometimes you feel tokenized or fetishized, or especially like lesbians, I think, get fetishized in video games a lot, and I think that's a really big problem in the game industry. Yeah, I don't know, that's as angry as I can get. Should I get it? I don't know.
No, that's good, that's good.
Well, for me, actually, at the same conference I mentioned earlier, one of the most frustrating things I heard from someone is that they believe that the intrinsic joy of learning is enough for a child to enjoy a game. And for me, that's just laughable. It's obviously they don't understand how the game mechanics can increase the engagement, and we can get better, more effective learning that way. So for me, I just want educators to realize that the game, the fun factor is equally, if not more so, equally as important as the learning itself.
I think it's the white egg in Angry Birds. They could have taken that egg and had it follow Newton's first law, where it would keep its X momentum when it dropped, and they didn't. They make it drop vertically. Like, why?
That's cool. That's exactly the way of thinking that I want to cultivate in everyone, right? Her ability to do just that, of how to make it both an amazing, engaging experience in a game, and also bring in the science and Newtonian mechanics and Newtonian laws into this, right? So what I'm really scared of is the idea that if you really agree that game media is the most pervasive media, it's really what media is all about today, we have to urgently make sure that in anywhere, in any culture, in all socioeconomic status situations, everybody is learning how to read and write this new media. And I think nobody, even in this community, which is very advanced, believe that this is the most urgent thing to do. That we need to cultivate talent. All of us know how to write. All of us know how to read text. We always read in a higher level than we write, but the more we write, the better we read. We become more critical readers. The more we read, the better writers we become. Some of us will become Shakespeare, but not all of us. But all of us are going to use writing in one way or another in our life, in our family life, in our community, in business, in government, and education. So if we really strongly believe that Games for Change is the most pervasive medium to impact ourselves and our society, let's teach both reading and writing.
So in that I actually did rant, let me turn your question around and say what I think is very good about what's happening.
Awesome.
First, I made a lot of friends in Washington Park on the way here.
Did you play chess? You could probably sleep there tonight.
Yes, I probably could sleep there tonight. That's right. In fact, someone did offer me a bench spot. Yeah. In Texas, I would have been arrested within about 3 blocks. Anyway, so I think that the reason for great optimism is that this is kind of out of our hands. I run a website, as some of you know, called Yville, which has been around for 13 years. It was the first virtual world for learning for children. We're approaching 8 million children registered in Yville with no marketing. I've heard in this conference several times people say that children have short attention spans. The average length of login in Yville is about 35 minutes. The average length that someone stays an active user is over 380 days. And Yville is not easy. It's hard. So I think that, I've also heard said, so it's even partially a rant, I guess, I've also heard said that we have to build curiosity in children. The people that say that must not have had children. Children are naturally curious. Every 11-year-old is a poet. What do? We make them read Shakespeare. That's just criminal. The wonderful thing about this technology that is happening whether we like it or not is it is transforming the way children learn themselves. We are, and this group collectively is trying to augment that, support that, build that. That's great. But the real momentum for this comes from kids. It's not going away. They are there. They are going to do this. As I said, it's kind of out of our hands. And I think that is great reason for optimism.
So we have a couple minutes left, and I think the way I would like to use that is to give you each, say, maximum of 2 sentences to describe the party you think is most responsible for the problem that you're describing.
Two sentences?
Yeah, 3 sentences. We have about 3 minutes. You don't have to start, man.
Okay, I can go.
I'm pretty clear on this, actually. It's actually us, the developers. That's the problem. I complain a lot about games not being fun, and it's really, the educators and people who have the content, they know the content well, and they come to us to make the games fun. At the end of the day, if a game's not fun, it's the developer's fault.
I was going to say the same thing. It was the kids. I was going to say it's the if I think about Angry Birds, it's a Finnish company. I'm really high on Finland right now, so I shouldn't say anything bad about it. But I was going to say it's the 1%. It's the greed factor. If somebody only wants to make money, then they're not thinking about all the other ways they could use their game for good. And so, occupy game design, I guess.
That's great. So I think there is an ethical and social responsibility. If you buy into the idea that everyone should learn how to write, everybody should learn how to write games, tell stories, coding in that new, most pervasive media, then remember that it's a double-edged sword, right? Because the same language that is in common here can also be used for bad. To break into banks, to do terrorism, to really do a lot of bad things, violence, that we all know that the industry is filled with. So what do you do? What do you do to be socially responsible and ethically responsible about it, to really grow a generation of coders who are going to use it for good? I don't have the answer. I can just tell you that that's a question I'm obsessed with.
Ego, the tendency for people to want to control information, and university structure which was built in the Middle Ages and is no longer appropriate for the world. Being run by administrators who are very bad business managers.
My turn now? 18 to 40-year-old straight white men. Although I love straight white men. They're great. Just like, I don't know, just include more people,
One with a pirate. Just in case.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't think we're going to top that. So I think that basically wraps our rant and discussion. Can I have a round of applause for that?